Howdy folks, today we'll do a fresh install of ProbeIt for UCNC and show how to set it up and get it going. So after you go to craftycnc.com and you head to this page for plugins for UCNC, you'll find ProbeIt. You can click the download here. I've already got it downloaded here, and I've got a fresh install of UCNC version 2.2115 that I'll install it into. So first thing I'll show is that I keep multiple installations of UCNC, so whenever you install ProbeIt, you'll have to aim it at the folder that you're gonna run. If you want to run multiple versions and have it available in multiple versions, you'll have to install it into each. So first we'll just run the installer. You'll click next. You'll have to aim it at the UCNC folder. So in this case, we said we want to go and install it into the 2.115 version. So we will only click the high level folder there and hit OK. So all you want to pick is the main UCNC folder. You don't want to go inside and tell it to go into the plugins. And you'll install it. You can unclick the show README. That just gives you latest info, the last update, what was changed, bug list, whatnot. So we'll close that down. So now we're ready to fire it up and use it. So if we go into UCNC, you'll have to go to your settings and configure the plugins first. And you'll scroll down and look for ProbeIt. And you want to make sure it's enabled. And you can choose to do call on startup or not. If you want to see it pop up every time you start using CNC, check that. I'll show you a slightly better way. Once you've enabled it, you'll have to close, restart UCNC. So the way I like to start ProbeIt is to use a hotkey code. So if you go in back into configure plugins, now that you've got ProbeIt enabled, if you click the configure, you can pick any code you want to use. In this case, I'll use 333. Hit save it so you got that number there. And then you can close out of here. And if you go to IO setup, or sorry, IO trigger, the hotkeys, what you're going to do is set up a hotkey combination to open that. So we'll come over here. Well, the function code we just set in the plugin was 3333. And if you hit set key code, I'm going to hit Control-Alt-P, say OK, and it saves that code there. And you apply it. So now when I do Control-Alt-P on my keyboard, ProbeIt starts running. The first thing it does is, since this is a new install, there are no settings yet. So whether you're inch or metric user, you can use I or M here to pick a defaults. So I'm going to put I because I use inch standard SI units. And you'll get a pop-up that says you can run the calibration. So that'll be the next thing we do. And now it also does a quick check on the internet to see if you've got the latest version available. So what we'll do first is just kind of glance over the settings that are set up by default. Feed 1 is a rapid feed for probing. Feed 2 is the slow feed to do a second hit. Clearance feed is how quick it moves between locations. Say as it's moving around a corner along an edge, this will be the rate it moves at, traveling along the edge when it's not actually probing. Probe distance is how far to seek from when you start it to where it gives up trying to find a surface. Slow clearance, probably want to set this to a small value. That's how far it'll back off, and then do the slow feed rate to do a second touch. And then back off clearance is kind of like the clearance after it's done, how far it gets away from the surface. So after you make any changes, always hit Save Settings. You got a couple buttons here. You can show a status box. So you'll find status information here, like if you hit an e-stop and you clear it. And as you do probing, you'll see status of hits. Over on this side, you'll get measurements. And there is also a viewer screen, which you can hide some of the information to make it a little easier to see. But this will be as you're collecting, say, a DXF file. You'll see the DXF in your data form here, so you get a good picture of what you're collecting. So we'll hide that. So before you can do any real probing, I do recommend that you go to the probe setup page and you run a calibration. So what this is going to do is run around a ID of a ring gauge. You'll have to provide a ring gauge. Typical ring gauges are available. They're expensive. You could also use, say, an old ball bearing. Use the ID of a ball bearing of a known size, or any ID turned tube. So as an example, here I've got both a ball bearing and a piece of metal with a known ID I have. So we'll use either of these here to calibrate. Now I just want to get a side view of the camera I've got on the machine set up. So if we go here, and we'll start that. This will give us a view of what we're doing real time as we do it with ProbeIt. So I do have an Xbox controller set up for jogging. I am going to jog the machine around with it. One thing I do recommend before you ever start is do a quick check, make sure your probe is working. So the first thing I like to do is set a known Z surface so we know where we are in space. And then when we come over here to do the calibration, we'll want to lower it. So I've got it set to go 100 thou depth from the surface we touched off on. So I'll just say go down in Z. And if we show our status here, we can see what's happening. So now I'm going to, basically I'm located roughly in the center. I just eyeballed it and jogged it there. I've got my ring gauge set. The approximate the tip diameter of my probe is 70 thou. What you enter there isn't super critical because the whole point of calibrating it is to determine what probe size ball should be there to get correct answers. So as far as feeds, the latest version of ProbeIt calibrates at 2 speeds. It basically collects an equivalent ball tip diameter for the feed 1 value and the feed 2 value. So anytime you probe at any speed in between those two, it'll interpolate. So I'm going to set this up to 20 and set that to 2. And the other thing to note is the clearance it's going to run back during the calibration is based off of this clearance value here. So we've got that all set. I'm going to hit calibrate 1. You get a little pop-up just telling you what it's going to do, and it's going to run through 2 iterations. So we're going to say yes, and it's going to get started. So the first thing it does is it finds the center based off of the ball tip that you've given it. And now it's going to probe every 10 degrees and create a table for any angle it probes at. So as you can see, it's collecting for each angle. You know, we're at 0, 10, 20, 30. It's doing 40 degrees now. You collect a feed 1 and a feed 2 value, and the difference there is what effective ball diameter gets the right answer as you're traveling at different speeds. Alright, so it completed once around the whole diameter, taking a sample every 10 degrees, and it's just telling you it's going to rerun a second calibration. So, you know, you can see you got slightly different values for basically plus and minus y and plus and minus x. So it's just going to find a slightly different center and recalibrate based off that as it runs. Alright, and we just completed the calibration, and it tells us that the tip correction is turned on, as you can see up here. Again, you can turn that off and on, but it doesn't make any sense to turn it off, or you'll never get correct dimensions on stuff you probe. So as you can see, it generated a table with different values for the two different feed rates, and also the average ball diameter. We had put 70 thou in there before. It's been adjusted to something average of all of these values. But really, when you do any probing, it's always using this lookup table to get the most accurate result it can. So the most important thing to do after you do this, one is save settings, so all the values and all the input DRO boxes get saved, and then I highly recommend you do a save tip data. Just put in something you want to remember this tip by. It can be a date, or you know, what speeds you ran it at, whatever. But then you can always recall that tip data file and populate this without rerunning the calibration again. So that's basically it. You're ready to go and do some probing with ProbeIt. Couple other things you can check off here. I typically leave the bottom of the ball as 0, but you can set it up to control it as 0 is at the tip center. That makes some other measurements harder, but you can do that if you choose. So now as we go back here, say we want to find the center of this bore, we'll just check that on. It's going to tell you it's going to turn off the DXF measurement, because since you're doing a 0 operation, it doesn't make sense to record a data point and then change the position to 0. Alright, so there we've got our measurement. We've also got a pop-up measurement box here that you can click the box and make it keep from auto closing. You can see the settings here to have it show up, and then a delay time for how long it should display. So as you can see, the size we got was 1.7001 and 1.700. And if you remember, we calibrated against the ID and told it that it would be a 1.70 diameter ring gauge, which is what it is. So as you can see, it's pretty close, and we have set our X and Y to 0. And so we can close that box. And we're gonna lift up. Oop. Now say I want to probe this part here. Let's say I don't want to reset my Z. Instead, I'll just say probe to get Z. And so what it did is it found that this surface is 1.5 inches lower than this other surface I was probing against. So I didn't change my ZDRO, but I've set a new surface value reference for what I'm doing. And because this bearing has kind of a larger chamfer on it, I'm going to go down 200 thou in depth instead of 100 thou. And so I don't have to automatically manually set it down. I'm going to check the auto Z up and down button, and I'm going to run that. Alright, so as you can see, we got a size here on this other bearing, 1.692, 1.693. And if we go and we bring up our viewer, which is of course hiding behind the video, we can see we recorded this diameter off as a DXF off in space here with its position. You know, it's at x5 and y negative 0.5 and z negative 1.5. So if you look at it in plane, you'll see it's located in space based off the reference we set up. So that in a nutshell is how you get started probing with ProbeIt, from installing it fresh and getting it running and doing a calibration. So we'll do more in future videos. Thanks for watching.